Hello, how are you today? We are so happy to have you here at Genealogy Quick Start. Guess what? We have new quick starts for you today. Yes, we have a fun one. Jim and Michael came up with print and digital better together, which, we always think digital is better, but my buddies have ideas and I think that they're going to help you with your research. Michael actually came up with the second quick start, preparing for help genealogically. Have you ever reached out or decided you want to get help from someone? How do you prepare for that? If you're paying someone, you want to provide them with as much of the work that you've done. So Michael and I are going to share with you ways that you can prepare for help genealogically. So let me bring out the number one quick starters in the world. First out, James M. Beidler.
What about the Galaxy?
Oh, yeah, Galaxy. All right. Next up, genealogy tip of the day, Michael John NEILL. So how are you? Have you ever, I know you are expert genealogist, you started early, but have you ever hired anyone to do any genealogy work for you?
I am a big believer that there's sometimes when everyone needs some professional help. You can take that any way you want, right? But seriously, I have um, utilized professionals for lookups. Repositories that I either can't get to or can't get to easily, or specialized websites, things like that.
Michael, have you ever hired anyone?
I've pretty much done the same thing Jim has. I mean, I've not, written somebody a check to spend a whole week on something, but I've had, lookups here and there. Sometimes if it's someplace I'm unfamiliar with, the research and the records, maybe have a consultation just to get me jump started. Because like Jim said, everybody needs a little boost every so often. I'm going to use that word instead of professional help. But it doesn't hurt every once in a while to have a little boost or nudge to get you going in the right direction.
And
Most definitely.
I should also say that for the years that I was at Legacy Tree Genealogist, just during those years from 2018 to 2021, I saw a big shift in what people were getting help for. Getting research for hire for. I mean, one of course was DNA. That became bigger and bigger. But the other thing was analysis, because there's a fair number of people who once you got through a project, you realized they basically had the information there, but they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to resolve any contradictions. They didn't know how to say, you know what, this really is solved.
I love that. No, that's fantastic, Michael. I can't wait to talk about that during the second quick start. So you guys ready? Oh, I didn't tell everyone, where are you? And what is your genealogy group? Please put that in the chat. I think so far, because I didn't announce it, we do have a couple in there. Oh, here we are. We have Rosalind B. Green with the Tallahassee African American Genealogy Society. Welcome, Rosalind. And we have Dr. Shelley. Hello, Dr. Shelley. Thank you for being here. All right.
Hey,
Michael,
it's quality, not quantity. It's quality, not quantity with Dr. Shelley. So
most definitely. I like that. I like that. All right. Let's get started with our quick start. Print and digital better together. What does that even mean? I thought digital was like, it. We all need digital.
Well, I think that's what a lot of people think, and as a lot of these ideas come from, I'll give Michael a shameless promo. This comes from one of the tips that he included in more genealogy tips of the day, and that was that sometimes in addition to doing a search of a digital database of this, that, or the other record set. If there's a print copy of originally a book or a journal or whatever that's indexed, that can also be useful, and that's what we're going to talk about in some examples. The two can work together. It's not that you shunt the one aside once. Oh yeah, that's been digitized. Yeah, okay, whatever.
Makes sense. Michael, anything to add? Are you ready to rock and roll?
I think I'm ready to go. We'll just go ahead and get started.
All right. So let's get started with print. Oh, I think Anita Payne's here. Hi, Anita. Thanks for saying hello. Let's get started for print and digital better together, like us, Jim, Michael, and Shamel. All right, let's get going. I knew I'd make you smile. Let's get going with step one, which is to choose a relevant book or database. Okay, are there specific books that would be better or databases that would be better?
This is pretty much you pick what you're. What's really important here is that whatever you have, you look for the other part. Yeah, in other words, if you have the book, I wonder if this is searchable online. If you have a database, I wonder where they got this database from. Is it from a book originally?
So basically, they're books that people have abstracted or created transcriptions of stuff. That's the kind of books we're talking about. Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off, Michael.
No, I was just going to add to that the one digital database that a lot of people use is Find a Grave, and there are numerous published transcriptions of tombstones well before the digital era, and they can augment what's in Find a Grave. And in some cases, by the time somebody got around to taking photographs of the tombstones, they were gone. And maybe 50 years ago, they were still there, and somebody's made a transcription of those. So you don't want to rely on just that database.
I never would have thought of that. I'm like, Find a Grave is it. I wouldn't think of looking for a transcription book for that cemetery. You guys are phenomenal. Okay, so we choose a book or a database. And then step two, is it available in any other format? So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, one example that I didn't use in the examples I submitted are the Hamburg embarkation lists. These are lists of primarily Germans leaving in the 19th century from the port of Hamburg. In other words, that's kind of the mirror opposite of our passenger arrival list, and it has different data. Well, these went online with Ancestry, some years ago, and the wrinkle here is there are two databases related to these Hamburg embarkation lists on Ancestry. There are the actual lists that are searchable, but the handwriting is awful, so the search is not always fruitful. But then there are also handwritten indexes from the Hamburg authorities. And if you know either an exact date or a short amount of time that you're going to be looking for, you can browse through those handwritten indexes, and the handwriting is sometimes better than in the passenger list. It can be the key leading you to that embarkation, the actual embarkation list. So that's a marrying of what's now two digital items. But again, you don't just stop with one and decide, oh, there's handwritten indexes. Who wants to do that? No, work with all the tools that are available.
Yeah, so I found out about the New Jersey tax ratables. They were absolutely horrible. I hated looking at those, even though I needed this 18th century stuff. But the New Jersey State Archives has this pristine, beautifully redone. I don't know how they did it, but if you have a crappy digital, look for a better digital. It doesn't have to just be paper print to digital, just like you said. I like that. All right. Step 3 is to review the strengths and weaknesses. I think you mentioned some of those with Hamburg. Any other strengths and weaknesses that people might want to take a look at?
Whenever you're looking at something in print, or if it's even something digital, look at the frequently asked questions page. But for print things, the preface should indicate if there were years that were not extant, or things that were difficult, sections that were difficult to read, any idiosyncrasies with the records that you should be aware of should be in the preface. So you always want to take a look at that and read that. Some databases can be not so good about giving that information, at least in my experience. But books tend to give you a little more background about, there was a 5-year period that was not extant. There was a lot of water damage in the 1870s, whatever the specifics are, that just gives you a little more knowledge about why there may be some limitations with those records.
Okay. Sometimes it's genealogists. Often I've noticed when you look in these genealogy journals, they take things that are out there that are not like necessarily organized in a way that we could be more successful. And so I found that I can find in these genealogy journals transcriptions and stuff. And I think Percy might be good for that. All right. Step 4. Look at all names beginning with a certain letter in print formats. I'm dying to hear what this means.
You're the champion of this, Michael. So,
well, I think, this, when the last name is spelled awful, maybe the first letter is fine, but the rest of it's butchered for one reason or another. In the print indexes, or if a wildcard search will let you do it, the problem is on a digital database, you may get too many hits. But in a print index, just, if it's like Schnoorboekhoven, you're just going to start with maybe the S's, or you might go to the SH's or the SCH's and look for what could be Schnoorboekhoven or something reasonably close to that. There's going to be 42 million ways you could smell. Where did I get that? 42 million ways you could spell Schnoorboekhoven, and you're not going to think of all those. So just start and look. Read through that index for those in an initial letter and look at the rest of the names.
I want to say Gesundheit every time you're. But no, I would reinforce what Michael's saying, and his point too is that it's a lot easier to leaf through a print index than it is, just putting in an initial letter into a database, and because then depending on how what format, if it's going to the original records from that, then you're just getting too much information that you can't easily handle. So.
All right, so that's step 4. Step 5 is to do creative phonetic searches, first name only searches in databases. Tease that one out.
Yeah, well, the creative phonetic searches, and of course, yes, I'm most acquainted with German, so I'm gonna, when I have a surname starting with a K, I'm also going to look under C and G, because those consonants are all phonetically similar in German. Same way D and T and B and P. So you got more letters that you got to look at, and then not just the initial letter, but throughout the word, there may be a lot of phonetic differences.
And if you're querying a database, you'll want to make certain you know how wildcard searches work and how Soundex searches work, so that you can effectively search for as many variants as you can when you're doing that search of that database.
And
yeah, everyone.
I was just going to say that, and if you play the wild cards right, a lot of times you'll be able to search a lot of different phonetic variants just in one stroke. Yeah, not exactly. All of them, but yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, and I think the last one is to document and repeat. Let's look at your documents. Speaking of documents.
So as soon as I had read Michael's tip, the database and book set that I was thinking about was one that I've used often, and these are the colonial passenger lists, oaths of allegiance lists. They were originally collected and published in 1934 by the Pennsylvania German Society. They're called Pennsylvania German Pioneers, and this is thousands of immigrants in colonial times through the port of Philadelphia, which was the leading port of entry to North America in colonial times. So that book set was published in the 30s. It was republished by Genealogical Publishing Company in the late 60s or 70s, and now is an ancestry database. And of course, I have the print set in my library. But sometimes I work with the ancestry one, and this was one of the things in our steps that we didn't really touch on, is if I don't have a particularly common first name that I'm looking at, and I haven't gotten any surname hits, well, I'll just put in that surname, like Bernhard or something like that, and then just ride through the whole thing looking for the Bernhards, because you can't, if I'm doing a search on the surname, even if I'm accounting for variance, you can't account for things like the first syllable of the last name being cut off, or strange
Yeah.
anomalies that may happen like that. So that's a use of that, and in the as we'll see in the original, of course, they don't have a first name index.
Okay.
They only have a surname index in the book.
Right.
And this is the volume itself. Actually, it was 1980 that is the copyright on or the publishing date on the GPC reprint of this. And another thing, when you're looking at different, not just between digital and book, but also different editions of a book. When they republished this in 1980, they left out the one volume that had all the facsimiles of all the signatures. Oh,
Oh,
who needs that? Yeah, well, that is very helpful, and we'll see in a moment an example of that.
wow.
Yeah. So this is from the print version, and the print version is what Ancestry has digitized the two volume set. And this is nicer to work with than the originals. You want to go back to the originals when you need to.
Find your stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but start with something that's easy to read. And if we go on. This is just an example of showing the print index, and it's a traditional index, A to Z. They do give some sense of some of the phonetics there, and then we go to our example. Revol- it's a guy whose actual name is Casper Kreiser. And he actually was my ex-wife's ancestor two different ways. Lebanon County inbreeding, let me tell you. But we were looking, trying to find, and couldn't find this Casper. We had American records on him, but I saw this Casper Kreiter, and then, okay, Kreiter or Greiter. There's that phonetic shifts. And I thought, well, this is at least worth looking up, I guess, kind of, sort of. Although Kreiter or Kreiter is another name. So we looked it up, and be darned, what did we find? If we go on to the next slide. Oh, and do we have an underline here? I hope yes. That the one. There's three different lists in Pennsylvania German Pioneers for a lot of the ships. There was one where he is identified as Casper Kreiter, But if we go on to the next copy of the list, he's identified as Casper Greiser or Grazer, which is much closer phonetics to Kreiser than Kreiter. So these are not in the index. This Casper
Mm.
Grazer is not in the index, and with a lot of these folks, the handwriting is great. If you go to that second volume that Ancestry doesn't have. But if we go to that slide, it doesn't help us in the case of Casper because he was illiterate. He made an O as his mark. But anyway, this is just showing there's different ways to skin the cat. And if we had just slavishly looked at the book version and took Kreiter literally, we never would have looked this up and found when this immigrant came to America.
Wow. Love that.
Casper's mark looks like a little ghost, but we'll go ahead and go to the next.
What do we have here, Michael?
Oh, this must be my example. I'm not sure what we have here. No, these are. I was looking for a guy that was buried in El Dorado, Kansas, and when I went to looking, there were actually two different people that had transcribed the tombstones in this cemetery. So I looked at them both. This was the first one, and it was organized a little strange, and so I had to look at the table of contents to figure out where I was at, and they had these numbers and a dot to indicate where they were from in the book. That's like the table of contents. And I think the next one, yeah, that's his entries off of sixth. That's their coding number that I had to use that first page to figure out what cemetery it was. But unfortunately for my guy, there really was not very much. It was just his name, birth, and a death year, and that was it. There was no more. And so I went and looked in the other one, hoping there would be more. And this was a separate individual. Also did these cemeteries in Butler County, Kansas. That was just the screenshot of the cover of that. And then here, this was the page there's a little more detail here. I got to look at this really closely. It indicated, it came out a little blurry on that screenshot, that he was in section S, and that's not what was indicated in that first book didn't give me that precise information of where he was at in the cemetery. And that was helpful when I wanted to go and actually find the tombstone to take a picture of it. But again, there's no more information than just years on this one for him. And then I think the next one should be a picture of the stone, if I remember right. No. The second book had a map of the cemetery,
Nice.
and this was extremely helpful because it doesn't look large in this map, but it's a fairly large cemetery divided. This is the south part. There's also a north part, and it told me he was buried in part S. So that made it significant. Still took me a little while to find him, but that was not as bad as having to go through the whole cemetery. So it could have been much worse.
Much worse.
Now I think we should have a picture of the tombstone. Yeah. So
Hey,
there's his stone that I was lucky it was still extant. Because
it looks like it'll be grown over in like 4 years.
It was a very inexpensive stone. It was just pretty much looks like concrete with something on top where they could inscribe his name. Several of the others, and this was in 1945, he died, were in much worse condition than that, and a few were probably gone.
Yeah, it just looks low. I don't think it looks bad. It just looks low.
No, it's right at ground level there, so they can mow right over them. And yeah, so that was the actual stone there. Was there another example? I think there might have been a second example. Yeah, these are all digital. These are just a couple of examples of things that families search where there might be multiple databases to the same records or to very similar records.
That drives me crazy.
And so you've always got to make certain you're looking at all of them. Some of them, I think in this case, it's the second one that actually links to images. The first one does not. It's just a name
Ah,
index, I think. I know one is a name index and one links to actual images. And then the third one is an index just for
the
Cook
county.
County, but which is the Chicago area. But you've always got to look. There should be one more example there too, I think. Um, this is
These are the
some.
deaths.
These are 4 different databases of Illinois deaths. One is from an index the state Vital Records Department made. That's the one that goes through 48. That's just names and dates. Then another one is an index to the actual records.
Mm.
And then one is just a name index, and one I think links to the actual images. But at Family Search, you've got to be always aware that there might be 1, 2, 3 databases that are the same record. One may just be a text index, one may link to images, one might be an old index that was made decades ago and just got put in the database with newer ones as well.
So one of the things, the mantras that I always have is go to the original records, right? We all say that, which is important, and that needs to be the final stop. But that does not mean ignore the indexes. People have done work, right?
Yep, work of things that isn't still extant, like Michael's saying, and they're not all going to be the same. You know, like that one cemetery that had the map in it, and the other one didn't. So, yeah.
And sometimes, you know, some individuals have, what's a delicate way to put this?
Oh, don't be delicate.
They do a much better job than other individuals in terms of extractions and, you know, how they interpret things. And, you know, you want to get, if there are several different ones, you want to get the person that did the best job. But again, you don't want to rely on that totally. Those indexes and finding aids should be a stepping stone to the actual record, whether it be a church record, a probate record, or whether it be a stone you can literally step on. At the same time.
Love it. So those were the steps for, let's see, any final comments on,
you know, something popped into my head while Jim was talking, and then I forgot it, but now I remembered. Years ago, before things were indexed, I was trying to find somebody in an 1860 census, and the family was German. I knew about where they lived, and I could not find them by looking at the name. And so I went through and I read the whole township, and I didn't look at the names. I went and looked for anybody who was born in Germany, and then I went and more closely looked at the names. I finally found my person, but it was so butchered. I knew he was German, so I looked at the Germans as starting point instead of looking at the names.
I love that.
Excellent reverse engineering. Yeah.
That was how I found Woolpeert, because I forget what they did to his they butchered his last name more than his first name. That was bad enough.
I love that. I'm glad you remembered it. Let's go through the steps for print and digital better together. Step 1 is to choose a relevant book or database. Step 2, is it available in another format? Step 3, review the strengths and weaknesses. Step 4, look at all the names beginning with a certain letter in print. Step 5, do creative phonetic searches, first name only searches in database or ethnicity or, country of origin. Step 6 is then to document and repeat. That was great. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye, guys. Let's get ready for the second quick start. All right. Welcome back. We have our second quick start for the day. We have the quick start team is going to do this one. I don't know, Jim, you want to come back and do this with us? Or you going and drinking your Coke and doing your thing? All right.
I wasn't sure if I was invited or not.
Most definitely. You are always value added. All right. So we are ready for our next quick start, which Michael came up with. Game night is next time. Sorry. So let's look at what our quick start is. Preparing for help genealogically. We all need help. Jim and Michael shared, they are experts at this. They have been doing this for a long time. But, sometimes, hey, just go do some lookups for me. That's fantastic. So how do you prepare for that genealogically? Michael, what were your thoughts about, because you actually came up with this. Why is this important?
Well, one, you can make better use of that person's time, and whatever if you're spending money to have them help you, get better use for your money. If you do some of the things that we're going to talk about, prepare as much as you can. The analogy that I would kind of use that's similar, let's say you need your water heater repaired or fixed, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in front of it, and when the guy comes to fix it, he's going to have to spend time to clean everything out to get to your water heater, and he's going to have to bill you for that time.
Time is money.
Because you haven't prepared the space. So in terms of, if you're going to have somebody do work, whether it's, we're kind of thinking about a little more than a quick lookup in this discussion today. But if you're going to have somebody do some work for you or give you some in-depth help or some guidance about where to go next, you want to organize your stuff as best you can, figure out what it is figure out what it is you want to know, so that because people get frustrated when the expert tells them to do things they've already done. But in that person's defense, if they didn't know what you have done, it makes it, that's just the way it is. So you want to let them know as much as you can about what you have done and what you want and what you have, so they can help you as best they can. Otherwise, you're going to be paying the plumber to clean out your kitchen or whatever before he even gets to the water heater.
Most definitely. I remember I had to hire movers. They were like $178 for every 15 minutes after like a 4-hour clip. Man, everything in my house was packed up. Like, because that would have been really, really, really bad if I had to pack while they were there. All right. Let's get going with preparing for help genealogically. So step 1 is to choose a person. So I don't think we need to talk about that, right? All right. And then step 2 is, what do you want to know? I ask people this all the time and they're like, everything. Like, is this how you're supposed to hire someone? I want everything.
I would usually suggest, you're trying to find a relationship between two people, or who somebody's father is or their mother is, or maybe when and where they were born or something of that type. You don't just want to say everything about great grandma. That's a little too broad, and especially if it's somebody you've never hired before. If you say everything about great grandma, that's a long, in-depth project, and you might realize a little bit of the way in, you don't want to hire that person anymore. So
yeah, do you have
that's
everything?
Another reason to start small. That's another reason to start small too.
Yeah, everything money isn't always accessible to all of us. All right, so what do you want to know? So you said relationships are general. Sometimes things like
one vital event. Yeah, one vital event. Kind of start with that and kind of go from there.
Okay, kind of build. All right, step 3 is to review your research log. So what are we doing here?
Well, if you're not keeping a research log, you'll start one. But the research log needs to indicate everything you've searched, not just where you found things, but also the things where you did not find someone. You might even want to delineate a little bit about how you searched or what names you searched for, so that you know later. But that's something, when you'll share that with the person who's going to do work for you or give you a consultation or whatever, or just give you some pointers, they can see everywhere where you've researched. So again, they don't suggest places and approaches that you've already tried. And they could look and see, well, you looked at this, and that, but yeah, you didn't look at this, or you only looked at the digital format of these things. And like we talked about earlier, there's some print versions, there's the originals. You might want to go back and try those too. They can't do that if they've not seen your research log.
if they haven't seen you. And I have some samples of research logs. That was my contribution to Michael's quick start. So step 4 is to document negative research. We don't do this enough, I think. You kind of explained why. So tell us what negative research is and reiterate what you just said.
Well, there's a couple different ways we can look at negative research. One is you do a search and you don't find something. But negative evidence, if we kind of get into that concept, that's where you really should find someone and you did not find them, and the not finding them is a clue. But in terms of our research log and have somebody do consultations, negative research is where you did a search and you didn't find that person, but you've got to indicate as best you can how you search, what variants you looked for, and things of that type, what database you tried, what years you covered, because maybe you just looked at the court records from 1850 to 1890, and maybe turns out there's a reason why you should have gone later than that.
Okay, sounds good. And 5 is to transcribe and write up conclusions.
I think this is helpful because then the person can see for the things that you found. Transcribing is usually good because that makes us, we notice things in a document or record and we transcribe it that we might not notice and we just gloss over and read it quickly. But writing up our conclusions, then that could be something else. If you're having somebody do work for you or give you a consultation or give you some help, is they could simply look at the documents you found, your transcriptions, and then your conclusions and say, well, you're right about this, you're right about that, but whatever you inhale before you wrote that last conclusion, do not do that again. They can see, because that's sometimes where we're having a roadblock or a brick wall or whatever. We've reached a conclusion that is not supported by the evidence. That's a nice way of putting that. And somebody has something that they could look at and say, your third conclusion there is just that's just off.
Yeah, Jim brought that up. That was a great point about analysis,
because the person needs to know what's going on in your head, what your conclusions are, because that's the basis for which you're trying to go further.
Yeah, I like that because everyone thinks when you're a genealogist, everyone has the same skill set, but we all have different skill sets, and a lot of people may be competent in finding records, but when you kind of bring them all together and write up conclusions, that's a whole nother level of doing genealogy. Right. So it's helpful to try it, and then someone can review it and help you to grow. Step 6 is to share the information with the researcher. So I am going to bring up your slide. Okay, so you have, what do you want to know? What did you want to know, Michael?
Well, I wanted to know when this guy arrived in the United States and a little bit more. He was only in Kentucky for 10 years. So I'm not talking about his whole lifespan here. He was in Kentucky for a short time. That was something I didn't know originally. So I wanted to find out more about his life when he was there in the 1850s and early 1860s. And then when he arrived and came over on the boat. Those were the two things that I wanted to know. And I think in starting to get the answers to those questions, I had two documents. The 1850 and 1860 census, I think, were the only records I had on Michael, if memory serves. So those are my questions. And then if you go to the next slide, there should be an image of him in this is the 1850 census for Michael and for Margaretta. And then and I love how they spelled that third name. Now I transcribed.
Yeah, I say an item.
Yeah, it's an item. He was a hot item. No, it's his. I'm fairly certain it's Michael's brother Adam. The age is right. The age is right to be his brother Adam. So that's who that is. And it all goes back to, these were Germans. They spoke German. They're in rural Kentucky. And it's, this just, that's how those things happen. And fountain cents, you might notice fountain cents.
Fountain cents.
Without going into all the details on fountain cents, I think that's Valentine Senf was his last name. Senf
Ah,
was his last name, and I'm butchering that pronunciation of that. But there's a relative in that family whose last name was Senf.
okay.
Nephews of Michael had that last name, so that's um, that's not Fountain Sense. Again, you've
It's
got
so-
you've got a you've got a Kentuckian spelling those German immigrant names. That's the problem there. Um, and then here he is in
60.
1860. The item is gone, and so is the fountain. But he and his wife are there, and then I'm assuming that's um, a hired man, probably
Hmm.
living with them. Uh, and then, but that's what I had. Then I've got, and we're not going to read through all the analysis, but this was
Is this
part of.
an item or is this Adam?
This was an item about. This was something I wrote up about item, who item was. And this talks about who item was. I did find item on a manifest. I don't have the date of the manifest on here, but and again, these are Germans where their first name, they were all first name John or Johann. And so that first one you see here is kind of small, but that's John Johann Adam. That's the item. And then I'm not sure who the dude is, the second dude, but the third one is um, Johann Valentine, and that's that Senf. That's that not common Valentine, whatever. Sense was his last name in the census. This is the sense and item on a passenger manifest. And then
Okay.
it's just my analysis of that. And that's something, if I'm going to have somebody give me some help or some guidance on this family, I'm writing up what I think I know about this passenger list combined with those census enumerations to get their feedback on if my thoughts are correct and if I'm going in the right direction with this.
Makes sense. Oh, here's Fountain.
And then here's a little commentary about Fountain Sense.
And it's not like a
Um,
10-page report. It's just
no,
like a
no,
little blurb
just a little
about
bit. There's
what you think.
maybe 5 or 6 sentences there. And why I think Fountain Sense is actually Valentine Sense, and a little discussion about Fountain. Um, and
Yeah, that's so
this
weird.
this is good for us, even if we're not going to have somebody help us with our research. Just
Mm-hmm.
putting these things together. Our discussion here is with the intent you're going to give this to someone and they're going to give you some guidance or do some further work for you or whatever. But even if you do this for yourself, you may realize when you're putting this together, you don't need somebody else to give you help.
Yeah.
You've already
Yeah.
got when you think about making your case or whatever you want to call it, you may notice some things and see some errors in your ways, or gaps may be a better word for that you need to follow up on.
For me, that's always what happens when you go back. It's like you're researching in your own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you make connections that you might not have made if you didn't come back. What else do you have here, Michael? Oh, this is what I have.
That's yours.
So my question was, what was their life like in Tallahassee, Leon County, Florida? And the goal was to trace them pre-1870 as much as we could. But we needed to get all the vital stuff for them. And so this is just I have 2 different logs that I would turn over. And it just has, this is all family search. So back in the day when it was called the Family History Library, we just got the microfilms and I just copied this directly from the catalog. And it has columns at the end for status and notes. And it was important to have these notes and the status because I was working on this with my cousin Floyd. And so in here you can see, or maybe not, you can see who we were looking for and kind of like what it was, who did we find, who we didn't find. The negative research is included there. And then this was one when I went to the New Jersey State Archives. My cousin Floyd and I were just doing kind of bits and pieces. And so at the top of this, I had my objectives. And then I proceeded to have like my notes. What did I find? So I have the record I found, looked for birth. I looked for Nadine. I didn't find Nadine. I searched for, this thing is in my way. I searched for, in 1918 for her. Yeah, I didn't find her. I put down which years I searched as well, the different ways I looked up tumor. And I could probably come up with some more. And then this is court records. My uncle Bees was falsely accused. There was a big trial. He was falsely accused of murder. It was a big trial. So we wanted to look through to see if we could find any information on the court cases. So I found my grandfather was doing stuff he shouldn't have been doing. So that was fun. What did Grandpa do? Breaking and entering, larceny. And he looks like he pled guilty. So yeah, I think those were my what my research reports look like. So Michael, I have never seen one of your research reports. So one day you're going to show me what it looks like.
That's part of those are just a couple of bits and pieces of one for that. That was part of an article I wrote, those those census numerations and that passenger manifest. But my goal was to try to find, I'd found some of them in, because they didn't all come over at one point in time. They came over, probably half a dozen different times, various members of that family. My camera moved on me. Over time. And the goal, of course, is to try to find when all of them are on a passenger manifest. We might use census records to kind of help narrow that down, but the problem is this guy didn't live until a census is asking him what year did you emigrate. He dies well before that, given when he was born, and so there's not children whose birthplaces I can use as a clue of when he crossed the pond. So all I really know is he was here in 1850. He came sometime before that. That's as specific as I got, and it's just but that's a case of just looking at what you've got and writing it up, and then it's like we said before. If you may see errors and omissions when you're doing that, but you might have Jim do a consultation and he looks over your stuff and he realizes
something different.
Right. He's gotten, and when you're writing those things up, don't write it. I mean, you use it for yourself, but when you're writing up any kind of analysis like that, you want to be imagining someone else is reading it that doesn't know, I hate to use the phrase doesn't know anything, but doesn't know anything about your family is a better way to say that. And you got any statements you make, you've got to have something to back it up. And just even going through that can be really helpful. But again, if you're going to have somebody do some work for you, like for these people, I don't want somebody to find things I've already found before, because that's going to be part of what's on their billable hours, and I'll realize, well, half the stuff they found I already had. and we kind of get mad about that, or we laugh about that, but if I don't communicate to them all that I've done and all that I found, then they are going to find some stuff that I found before, and I can't be irritated. You know what I mean? I can't be irritated with that.
I think at one point, though, if you haven't turned it over, like you said, you can't be irritated, but it might be a way for you to have a professional kind of organize your stuff. Even if you've looked at it, you didn't say it, but now it's going to be a part of a comprehensive report. And so, you shouldn't have to pay for something you've already done, but at the end of the day, it might be beneficial.
The other thing you could do is, if you didn't want to analyze it yourself, at least give them what you have found.
Yes.
And then they can go from there. At least they don't spend time finding what you've already found. If you don't if you don't feel comfortable writing it up, or that short paragraph, which I think are pretty short paragraphs, if that seems too onerous or reminds you of high school freshman comp and brings back bad memories and therapy is needed, then just send what you've found, and someone else can look at that, and they can summarize it, and maybe give you ideas on where to go next.
I love this. See, we have two different ways. Like if you're an experienced researcher like you are, you can get help by having people do lookups for you. And even in that case, you have to give them something.
Yes.
And then the other way, you know, you might not be as experienced, but you got a lot of stuff. And I've had this happen. Someone has turned over deeds and mortgages and quick claim deeds. They didn't know, like, what the heck is all this stuff? So I transcribed it, I analyzed it, and I created next steps for continuing. So you could do that as well.
Exactly.
Any final words? All right, let's go through the steps for Jim, if you could just say one word.
One word.
All right, thank you, Jim. All right, so preparing for help genealogically. Choose a person. Step 2, what do you want to know? And it's not everything unless you have everything money. Step 3, review your research log. Step 4, document negative research. Step 5 is to transcribe and write up your conclusions. Step 6 is then to share the information with the researcher. Jim and Michael, everyone, anyone who's watching, thank you so much. And if you're watching the recording, hey, let us know where you are and let us know your genealogy group. But for now, get out there and find your people. Thank you so much for being here. Jim and Michael, always an honor to have you on here. Thank you.
Good time.